Nevertheless, we do have many of the details that are recorded for us in the Word of God. Acts chapter 23. Acts chapter 23. I'm going to begin reading at verse 12. The morning after the Lord spoke with Paul in that vision which he had on the night after the meeting in the Sanhedrin, Jesus assured him he was going to go to Rome, that this is not where he was going to die in Jerusalem. And so that morning after, a group of more than 40 men took an oath, and they conspired together to kill the Apostle Paul. A conspiracy was hatched with the chief priests and the Sanhedrin members to carry out the plot. Asking for Paul to come to the Sanhedrin, the plot was known to Paul's relatives and the Roman chief captain. So let's take a look at the passage. Acts chapter 23, beginning at verse 12. And when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now, does that mean they ate absolutely nothing and drank absolutely nothing? No. It actually means that they were taking a Nazirite vow, which prohibited them from eating any common food that they might have eaten, like a steak or Kentucky Fried Chicken or something like that. No, they had to eat something that was like what John the Baptist ate, locusts or things like that. And so they were bound under this oath, and they couldn't drink anything like any grape juice or anything like that. It had to be just plain water. And there were more than 40 which had made this conspiracy, verse 13. Verse 14. And they came to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a great curse, that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. Now therefore, ye with the council signify to the chief captain that he bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though ye would inquire something more perfectly concerning him. And we, or ever he come near, are ready to kill him. And when Paul's sister's son," that means we now know that Paul had a sister. We don't know if he had any brothers, but we know that he had a sister. And we know that he had a nephew, that his sister had a son. Heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. Now, you might wonder how he could have known. That's not really that difficult to imagine. We know that two of the members of the council were believers, Simon of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Both were believers. And there probably by this time were others that were also believers. They could have easily gone and said to Paul's nephew, "You need to tell Paul this is what they're talking about." Nevertheless, they would not have wanted to be discovered, because they would have been considered traitors. And furthermore, they would have been expelled from the council and never again had any inside information as to what was going on. says in verse 17, then Paul called one of the centurions unto him and said, bring this young man unto the chief captain, for he hath a certain thing to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and said, Paul the prisoner called me unto him and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee, who hath something to say unto thee. Then the chief captain took him by the hand and went with him aside privately and asked him, what is that thou hast to tell me? And he said, the Jews have agreed to desire thee that thou wouldest bring down Paul tomorrow unto the council, as though they would inquire somewhat of him more perfectly. But do not thou yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now are they ready, looking for a promise from thee. Now, how would he know? Because these men had already approached him. So when this young man comes and says, this is what they're going to do, he already knows it's true. So the chief captain then let the young man depart and charged him, see thou tell no man that thou hast showed these things to me. Yes, his own life would have been in danger, and the way to save Paul would have been endangered if he had let out that he had told the chief captain. Now, it's obvious that the chief captain has been talking with Paul. He is more than sympathetic to Paul. He has a real desire to see Paul freed. And so 2 centurions, okay? Each centurion is in charge of 100 soldiers. Yes, it could vary somewhat. Could be 120. Could be 95, but it's always close to 100. And each centurion has at his command 100 soldiers at least. So now 2 centurions with 200 soldiers and 70 mounted cavalry soldiers escort Paul to Caesarea and to deliver him over to the authority of Felix, who agrees to take the case. The name of the chief captain, and this is one strong indication to me that he was a believer by this time. Luke tells us his name. And usually when Luke tells you someone's name, it's either because they are totally opposed to the gospel, and he says so, or they're already a believer. His name was Claudius Lysias. Claudius Lysias. We'll begin at verse 23 again. And he called unto him 2 centurions, saying, make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70. 70, a score is 20, so that's 3 times 20 plus 10, 70. And spearmen 200. Now he's got 200 soldiers with spears, 200 foot soldiers, 70 cavalry to protect one prisoner who is totally defenseless, has done nothing wrong. Okay? This would almost be considered overboard, except that Paul has already endeared himself to Claudius Lysias. At the 3rd hour of the night, He waits until it's dark. The Jews think that he's going to take Paul before the Sanhedrin the next day. They can all rest easily. They think this is a done deal, and that Paul by the next day is going to be dead. But no, the third hour of the night, when nobody sees, they take off. Now, understand where the dome of the rock, right here. The temple used to be built right in here. This is Temple Mount. And all of the platform, which is the foundation of the temple, is still intact. The Roman guard, the Antonia Fortress is the name of that. The Antonia Fortress was, could have shown with that one too, was right in here. Okay? This is the east side of Jerusalem. Here's the west wall where the Jewish people pray until today. It is from the original foundations, some of which go back all the way to the time of Solomon, and some from the time of Herod the Great. They have to be able to escape from Antonia Fortress out of Jerusalem and make their way towards Caesarea, which is by the sea, okay? By the Mediterranean. It's on the Mediterranean, as we will see. So there's a certain route that they have to take. And the Bible here tells us about it. Verse 24, and provide them beasts that they may set Paul on, and bring him safe unto Felix, the governor. Now, by the way, the streets at the time of Herod, some of them you can see, but they're underground. The modern city of Jerusalem is built on top of all the ruins. Now, the Jews have gone under, and they have put bracing in to hold up the city where it is, and they have excavated underneath. This was a Herodian street that is directly under where Paul would have had to leave to go out of Jerusalem with this group of soldiers. Solomon's stables, also underground in Jerusalem, where King Solomon had his horses and so forth. The Golden Gate, which is on the east side of Jerusalem, which was sealed up by Solomon, not Solomon, Soliman, the emperor of the Ottoman Empire in 1500 and something, when he sealed up the gates to prevent Messiah from going in there. Didn't know that Messiah had already gone in there. And that the prophecy said that they would be sealed up afterward. And yes, they were. That's the inside of the Golden Gate, which you can see goes down the steps, and there you have the Golden Gate. Now, this is the longest stone in the temple. This was at ground level at the time of Christ, but as I said, the Jewish people have undermined that, and you can see the bracing that holds up the city that's up above it. This stone goes from here, and it's way up here, and it goes all the way down here past this man. Huge stone. Do you realize that that stone has been there for thousands of years? And with earthquakes and everything else, it's still there. Okay? The temple was built on top of that. That is not the temple. It's the foundation of the temple. It held up the platform on which the temple sat. This is looking at the platform, a replica of it, with a replica of the temple. Now, this thing was huge. It was a replica of the city of Jerusalem around the year 30 AD. And it's done by the Jewish people. It's outside the city of Jerusalem. And it occupies a huge plot of land. This is not some tiny little thing. It's actually very big. The Antonia fortress, where Paul was held, is on the other side of this part right here, which is where the soldiers were quartered in the case of war. Herod's palace, which was built right next to the temple also, and the Antonia fortress. Over here was the temple. Okay? Does it give you a little bit of an idea of what was going on? The route that Paul had to take would have been through the only entrance into the Antonia fortress, and then they would have had to go out and go around the temple complex and so forth to exit Jerusalem. Let's go on further. And he wrote a letter after this manner: Claudius Lysias, unto the most excellent governor Felix, sendeth greeting. This man was taken of the Jews and should have been killed of them. Then came I with an army and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. He didn't actually know that when he rescued him. It was much later that he found that out. And when I would have known the cause wherefore they accused him, I brought him forth into their council, whom I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of bonds. And when it was told me how that the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee, and gave commandment to his accusers also to say before thee what they had against him. Farewell. Then the soldiers, as it was commanded them, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. This is the route to Antipatris. Now, yes, it doesn't quite look as good as it did at the time of the Apostle Paul. It was stone, and it was cobblestone road that went all the way from Jerusalem to Antipatris, which is quite a distance. Of course, you're not going to be able to take that today in a car on that road, but that was the road. And this was the fortress at Antipatris. It is there that they entered into the Roman fortress, and they were going to change. The cavalry unit was sent back to Jerusalem and arrived back in Jerusalem at night. The foot soldiers were going to go on with Paul, who was given a horse. and was allowed to ride a horse all the way to into Caesarea. Verse 32, on the morrow, they left the horsemen to go with him and returned to the castle, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him. And when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was. And when he understood that he was of Cilicia, said, I will hear thee, said he, when thine accusers are also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. Now, he is now in Caesarea. Caesarea no longer is a city where anyone lives, but the city of Caesarea was a booming city at the time that Paul went there. It was the chief port for that whole region of the country. There is no natural bay until you get to the northern part of Israel. So here they had created a harbor that could be used, a port. And the port can be seen down here. This was all filled with water at one time. Today it's earth has been washed in there by the Mediterranean, and so it is full of dirt today, and grass is growing there and so forth. But there is part of the port which still exists. This part of the port still exists, and what you're actually looking at here, let me describe it for you. This is the Mediterranean. They had dug this out of solid rock, lowered the level, then broke it open so that ships could get in through this side and through this canal over here. Now, let's face it, we're not talking about a modern super tanker, okay? It's not going to fit in there. And it has largely filled with silt over the years. And the stones have been eaten away. But at one time, the ships would have come in here, and these are small ships, Roman-style ships, bringing supplies or more soldiers. And they would have tied along the sides here where the ships were allowed to tie, as well as here. And they were protected from the fierce weather that could develop and often does develop still in the Mediterranean, as well as the waves and so forth. It became a harbor for these ships and a port where they could dock. This is where Paul is going to spend the next several years. And the city was well fortified. This particular picture is from outside the city of Caesarea, and you see there the walls around the city, what's left of them. Now, they dug a moat around the city, and they allowed it to be filled with beasts that would not be like alligators, that would not be very friendly toward anyone who was trying to break into the city or whatever. And so this particular wall is slanted, and it has a moat around it. So if you're trying to climb up and you fall back, you're going to fall right into the jaws of some angry beast. Okay? This was their protection. And the walls still exist. Now, where the walls went up beyond this, much higher, no longer exists. For the most part, those have been taken away and used for the stones to build something else. Chapter 24. Verse 1. And after 5 days, Ananias, the high priest, descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. Now, I want you to notice who they have coming to accuse Paul. He's not a lawyer. He's not a Jew. He knows absolutely nothing about this case except whatever they've told him. He's an orator. Now, why an orator? Well, because they want to address Felix. And Felix speaks in Latin. And these Jews don't speak Latin that well. So they want someone who can come in and address the governor using flowery words in Latin to make him feel like he ought to do this thing that they want him to do, kill Paul. So it says, after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, seeing that by thee, notice how he begins. If you're going to write to the president or address the president of any country, you're going to use nice words. Okay, you don't just say, hey, you. No, that's not the way you address a person of high authority. And so he does. He says, seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence. You provide everything we need. You are so good. We accept it always, and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness, notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee. Now, I don't want to take any more of your time. This is also typical when you're addressing someone in authority. I pray thee that thou wouldest hear us of thy clemency a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took as if he were there, and he was not there, and would have judged according to our law. They were beating him to death. But the chief Captain Lysias came upon us and with great violence took him away, as if Lysias came and just beat them all up. Lysias went and saved the life of Paul, but Scriptures tells us nothing of him creating great violence. Commanding his accusers to come unto thee by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so. The rest of all of these men that were there, all they did was go, he's right, he's right. Now that's the picture of what's going on. Felix already knows that Paul has done nothing wrong. Lysias has told him that very clearly. So why would he keep Paul in custody? Why was he going to spend years? He wanted money. He wanted Paul to bribe him to let him go, when by Roman law, he had to let him go anyway. Have you ever been somewhere where the police said to you, $20, $20, and I'll let you off? I have. I won't even talk about the multitude of times that happened to me. Let me tell you the one time that it happened to Elaine. She went into a very sharp curve. They call it a rotonda, a circle. Now, the circle was very small, in fact, smaller than our church building. And there was a policeman out there with a radar gun that said that Elaine, at the busiest time of the day, when all this traffic was in there, and it would have been impossible to even go the speed limit, much less in excess of the speed limit, that Elaine was going 100 kilometers per hour in this circle. And can you imagine trying to drive a car around in a circle that would fit inside our church building and making it at 100 kilometers an hour? I can't even imagine her. She may be a speedster, okay? I wouldn't deny if he had said she was going 5 kilometers over the speed limit, I would have said, maybe, honey. After all, when she would leave church, people at church, I'd say, where's Elaine? They'd say, she took off. So yeah, she had a heavy foot on the pedal to the metal, but not in this circle. And so Elaine would be offered by the policeman, you could just give me 20, and then you won't have to pay 40 down at the police station. Elaine said, give me the ticket. Well, she knew something the policeman was going to soon find out. Chief of police lived about a block and a half from our church and was a good friend. And I went to see him with the ticket and with my wife. And I said, can you imagine that this policeman said that she was going 100 kilometers an hour in this little tiny circle? And he said, immediately said, call for so-and-so. And they called the policeman in there, and he was trembling when he walked in. And he said, I want this ticket to disappear. And he handed it back to him. And the policeman said, yes, sir. And he was out of there. That was the end of that ticket. We never again saw it. But let me tell you something. It's very common for policemen all around the world to do what Felix was trying to do. He wanted to get money from the Apostle Paul. And he was going to keep him in prison even though he was innocent of anything, even though he really had no jurisdiction whatsoever that would allow him to keep a Roman citizen in prison with no charges. Let me tell you, 2,000 years later, it's no different. Sometime, if you would ever like to go with me to a certain place, Santa Cruz, Bolivia, and go into the prison there, one of the pastor's wives is on the review of the Supreme Court of that country. When I went in there, we have a lot of students that are studying our materials in there. The police won't even go in there. I go in there and the students all surround me and protect me. I'm not even allowed to take my passport or anything else with me. And I always imagine, what if when I'm going to leave, they tell me you can't leave? And by the way, if you wait till 1 minute after 5, they don't let you out. You have to spend the night. A scary place, isn't it, Elaine? But you've read what it says. It is considered the most horrifying prison in the world. I have been in there several times with our students. Every time I go in there, they want me to pay them money to take our Bible college materials in. They ask me for money. Sorry, I didn't bring my wallet with me because I was told you guys would not allow me to have it in here. I'm talking about the guards. Yeah. 2,000 years later, we haven't seen a great improvement. You need to be thankful for what you have here. Because for the most part, dirty cops end up going to prison themselves. I'm glad for that. Because I've been in places where the dirty cops are the ones that run everything. That's the case with Paul. He's going to spend 2 years in this place. He's being accused, so now he makes his defense. It's found in verse 10. Then Paul, after that the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, answered, For as much as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself, because that thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem for to worship. I was only there 12 days ago. Hasn't been that long. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogues, nor in the city, neither can they prove the things whereof they now accuse me. But this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets, and to have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and unjust. And herein do I exercise myself, to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. Now, after many years, I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings, whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with tumult, who ought to have been here before thee and object if they had aught against me. You realize what Paul's saying? I have a right to face my accusers, not a paid accuser. People that can accuse me and say that they saw me doing something. He was denied his rights according to the law of Moses, and he is now being denied his rights as a Roman citizen as well. Or else let these same here say, if they have found any evil doing in me, while I stood before the council, except it be for this one voice that I cried standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question by you this day. Paul says that's the only thing that I could have ever said that they might object to. And of course, they could not object to that. It was a trial of sorts. Felix should have said the same thing that Lysias said. Paul, I'm giving you a chance to get out of town. You've done nothing that should have put you in prison. You have done nothing worthy of death. And these people haven't even accused you of having done anything that was worthy of death. My question to you today, where is a man like the Apostle Paul today? Folks, we live in a dangerous world. Now, we can either hide, like some of those people said to Nehemiah, let's go hide. Or we can say, we live in a dangerous world, but there's a job to be done. There are souls that are on their way to hell today. There are people that need the gospel. I'm looking in these days of my life, who is going to take up the flag and say, let's go forth with the gospel. Let's do the job. It doesn't matter what any evil empire may say. It doesn't matter what people might do to us. What matters is how are we going to stand before the Lord someday and answer to him for why we did so little in the day in which we live. Today, we need real men of God. I don't care what it costs me. If I did care, I certainly would not have gone to Paraguay. I would not have taken my children to live in the jungle. Where are the men today? There are still people that need the gospel, and they're all around us. We don't even have to cross an ocean to see them. Are we going to continue living as we are when the world so desperately needs a testimony to the gospel message? Father, I pray now that you would indeed touch our hearts very deeply. Cause us today, Lord, to be motivated. May the life of the Apostle Paul, a man who certainly suffered for your name's sake, may we learn from his life that there are things more valuable even than life itself. That we were left here with a message that the world so desperately needs today. A cure for something even more deadly than coronavirus. Sin. And Lord, we have the cure. Can we hold on to it and not do a faithful job of proclaiming it? Lord, forgive us. Help us, Lord, to take up today the job that lies before us and to do it with all our heart. In Jesus' name, amen. orchestra.